The causes of the 1959 Cuban Revolution. The 1950s was a great period of unrest for the country of Cuba. During the 1950s, Cuba also underwent a revolution. Students rose up in protest, and many events and objections transpired, such as Fidel Castro's attack on the Moncada barracks. But why exactly did this revolution occur? There are three basic reasons for the success of the Revolution of 1959. These are the corruption of the government, the state of the economy, as well as Fidel Castro's speech against the government and Batista. Corruption was one of the essential reasons for the revolution. Batista first gained official power in 1940, overthrowing Carlos Socarras's government in a 2-hour-long and bloodless coup d'etat. However, he had been influencing the government since 1934 through puppets. In the same year that Batista became the president of Cuba, the Constitution of 1940 was established. In 1952, he became president again. During Batista's rule in Cuba, organized crime and prostitution flourished. Batista created close relationships with American mobsters, receiving aid from them, and also legalizing gambling, turning the city of Havana into what was called the Latin Las Vegas. When an uprising began in the people, Batista had his police torture suspects and execute them as an example, a warning to any of those who may be plotting against him. There was tension between the people and their leader because of his mistreatment of them. Batista controlled a great many cops, judges, and even Supreme Court justices were influenced by Batista's will. Police brutality and torture was common, and there was much racial discrimination. In response to foreign powers' suspicions about his questionable rule over Cuba, Batista held a mock election in 1954 that he was the only legal candidate for. By holding this mock election, he could retain power over the country while appeasing the foreign powers. In 1954, in response to Castro's speech at his trial called "History Will Absolve Me," Batista suspended the Constitution of 1940 for 90 days. Under Article 41 of the Constitution, he was allowed to suspend certain articles. The articles that he was permitted to suspend were Articles 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 32, 33, 36, and 37. This was only acceptable when the security of Cuba required it. In such cases of war or invasion, great disturbance of order, or other disturbances of public peace. Any suspension was limited to a 45-day maximum. Although he was allowed to limit the freedoms listed for a short period of time, he was not permitted to eliminate all freedoms. Furthermore, he also violated several other articles which he was not permitted at all to influence. Batista violated Article 38, stating that acts attempting to limit the citizens' participation in the politics of the country are punishable by law. This occurred in both his torture of protesters and his fixing of the 1954 elections. He also violated Article 40, which says that any power that tries to abridge, restrict, or corrupt the rights guaranteed by the Constitution shall become null. To stop riots and anti-Batista demonstrations, he took control over the media and what they could distribute to the citizens. At the end of his term in 1959, when Batista was meant to step down, his corrupt police and army kept him in power. This gained a response from Castro, causing Batista's followers to abandon him because they knew he could not withstand Castro any further. And so Batista left the country in December of 1959. Another cause of the revolution in Cuba was the economy. Cuba had a monoculture, meaning that they relied heavily on one cash crop. The crop that they grew was sugarcane. Sugar was deeply rooted in the history of Cuba. It played a role in both the 1895 Cuban Revolution as well as the Spanish-American War, as it does in the Revolution of 1959. Those who owned sugar mills were chosen by the state, and so the basis of Cuba was therefore controlled by its leader. The sugar trade eliminated small farms, and by doing so, devastated the development of the peasant class, leading to poverty. Because of the Platt Amendment, the U.S. had the right to step into any Cuban affairs. Through the Jones-Costigan Act, established between Cuba and the U.S., Cuba was compelled to allocate how much sugarcane would be grown. Therefore, an outside power was influencing their economy. Wealth was unevenly distributed among the people. Before 1960, the income per person was $356 a year, only $91 for peasants, and about 5% of the population controlled more than 80% of the money in the entire nation. 75% of rural dwellings were huts made of palm trees, with more than 50% having no toilets, 85% having no running water, and 91% having no electricity. There was only a single doctor for every 2,000 people. Healthcare was lacking, and 1/3 of the rural population contains parasites. Jobs were scarce, and 25% of the labor force was chronically unemployed. Education was pathetic. 45% of the rural population was illiterate. 44% had never even attended a school. 61% of rural children and 27% of urban children were not receiving an education at all. The standard of living was low, and the life expectancy was only 56 years. Another reason for the revolution was Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro and his revolutionary forces were a major cause of this revolution. His inspirations for revolt were the education of the illiterate farmers and the poor health care for the people of Cuba, which stemmed from his experiences and early life. Castro emphasized anti-imperialism, economic independence, political liberty, social justice, and a vaguely defined socialism. As the people had been embittered by these aspects, especially about the United States' power over them, this platform helped him gain support. After his attack on the Moncada barracks on July 26, 1953, he was arrested. Through his speech at his trial in October 1953, which was called "History Will Absolve Me," he became a martyr, or a heroic symbol, to the people of Cuba. This made him a greater threat to Batista, and also strengthened his cause and support. The U.S. embargo on Cuba in 1958 encouraged Castro's actions. As Batista no longer had armed support from the U.S., he thought his forces may stand a chance against him. There were various reasons for the revolution of 1959. Batista was a corrupt leader that mistreated his people and stepped outside the boundaries of his presidential powers. The economy was emaciated, and poverty and unemployment were miserable throughout Cuba. Finally, the actions of Fidel Castro ignited the flame that pushed the revolution against the Batista regime to success.